Welcome to my Blender tutorial. I'll be showing you how to turn your Blender scene or object exported into a simple turnaround animation. This will look nice on single objects or low poly scenes. This tutorial will assume some familiarity with the program. I assume you're already aware of what a render is or what a scene is, and other such things. But for clarity, I will guide you along with the shortcuts or tools that I'm using along the way. First, have your scene in object mode. If all the meshes are separate, you can merge them into one object with the following shortcuts. Control and A will select everything in the scene that is manipulatable, so make sure everything is visible and movable, or else this won't catch it. Next, Control and J will join all of these selections. Now we have one object. You can save this as a separate file at this point with Shift-Control-S. If you forget to do so, you might instinctively overwrite your save with this single object, and you'll lose all of your individual meshes. It's a good habit to save every few minutes with Control-S. Before I go any further, let's review our settings. It's your choice to have whatever render presets you want. Check your frame rate under the Render tab. Frame rate is how many frames play in the duration of 1 second. Over here are your number of frames. So, for example, I have 120 frames. At 60 frames per second, I would have 2 seconds worth of animation. At 30 frames per second, I would have 4 seconds worth of animation. Try not to equate lower frame rate with a slower animation, or else it will look choppy. Instead, think of it as smoothness, and if you want a longer and slower rotation, add more frames instead. These are the dimensions of your render frame, and this is the quality. Make sure your camera is set up the way you want. In fact, make sure you even have a camera in your scene in the first place. If you don't, add one. By the way, everything looks like this because I'm working in orthographic mode, both for editing and for my render. That's just my personal choice because I think it looks better for this scene. You can switch between perspective and orthographic views in editing with Numpad 5. You can render an orthographic view in your camera settings. Use Numpad 0 to switch into camera view. This sets up your scene while editing from the point of view of your camera, so you can see it the way it will end up looking like in rendering. Make sure you're happy with the framing and positioning of your scene. It would be terrible to just render everything and it turns out it's off screen. Open the Object tab. Under Transform, we have our object's rotation, which should be default be 0 everywhere. You should be on the first frame by default, but if you want, find frame 0 on the timeline and click it. If your timeline isn't open, toggle it here. After checking that we're on the frame we want, and our object is set to the settings we want, which right now is 0, because it shouldn't be turning yet, we can use I to insert a keyframe. After you've done the first keyframe, skip ahead to the last frame of your animation. Add something just under a full 360-degree rotation on your Z axis. I mean, you can rotate it on any axis you want, I guess. This just makes more sense. So do something like 355 degrees or 359 degrees, depending on your frame rate. It's your judgment. Press I for the next keyframe. Press play in the timeline to check out your animation. If you don't like the slowdown approaching our keyframes, you can switch into a linear animation. Go to Graph Editor, Key, Interpolation Mode, and press Linear. Press play. Does that look better? If you're happy, it's all set up. Now we just have to render it. Check here for where the final product, whether it be images or a video, will save to. It usually defaults to a temporary user folder that Blender tries to create for you, but this might not work if you don't have such permissions, so change it. If you're rendering it as a bunch of images to stitch together later, save it to a folder to keep them organized. Also, remember if you take that route, there will be no indication of your frame rate, so it's on you to remember it. In Blender 2.79, it defaults to a PNG, so if you want a video, click here. Select a movie format of your choice, and adjust the settings to your choice in encoding. For this, I'm just doing a simple MP4. I've already rendered it beforehand. So here's what your final project or final product might look like. That's all for my Blender tutorial. Thanks for watching.